Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Supradeep Das, and I am a research intern at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. On behalf of the Institute of Chinese Studies, I welcome you all to today's Wednesday seminar, Convergence Without Alliance, Strategic Pressures, Domestic Constraints, and the Making of the India-Japan Strategic Partnership. I am delighted to welcome you all to today's seminar. As we had conveyed to our viewers, our designated chair for today's seminar, Professor Shravani Roy Choudhury, had to attend some urgent matters due to some unexpected developments. We are, however, extremely thankful and delighted to Dr. Devendra Sahu for stepping in at a very short notice and agreeing to chair today's session. Today's discussion focuses on evolving India-Japan relationship, which has expanded from a limited bilateral engagement into a broad, special strategic and global partnership encompassing defense, maritime security, infrastructure, critical technologies, energy resilience, and regional cooperation. Despite growing convergence, the two countries have not formed a formal alliance. Using the framework of neoclassical realism, the presentation explores how shared concerns over China's rise, the changing Indo-Pacific security environment, and emerging economic and technological challenges have encouraged closer cooperation. At the same time, it argues that domestic factors, including leadership perception, strategic culture, institutional arrangements, and differing foreign policy priorities, shape both the opportunities and limitations of this partnership. Today's seminar will offer a nuanced perspective on India Japan relations, arguing that the partnership is best understood as a calibrated strategic alignment rather than either a formal alliance or purely a transactional relationship. The speaker for today's seminar is Dr. Anudeep Gujjati. He is an assistant professor at the Symbiosis Law School, Pune, Symbiosis International Deemed University. His research interests include Indian and Japanese foreign policy, Indian foreign policy, Indo-Japan relations, the Indo-Pacific, international relations theory, digital diplomacy, world order, and non-traditional security. His articles have been published in reputed outlets like The India's World, The Diplomat, The Hindu Business Line, Telangana Today, Indian Express, and Orca India. The chair for today's seminar is Dr. Devendra Sahu. He is an associate professor of Japanese studies and associate dean for online programs at Jindal School of International Affairs, OP Jindal Global University. Dr. Sahu holds a PhD in Japanese studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He was a recipient of the Monbuka Gakusho Fellowship and pursued research at University of Tokyo for 2 years. He has interviewed various high-profile dignitaries, including Mr. Shinzo Abe, former Prime Minister of Japan. He represented India in prestigious program for human resource development in Asia for peace building, commissioned by Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. Dr. Sahu also contributed to the Japan, South Asia, and Japan Korean Peninsula segment of an illustrious database, The World and Japan, funded by Grantsinate from Ministry of Education, Japan, and Japan Society for Promotion of Science. Dr. Sahu's research interests span in the field of Japanese studies, international political economy, and Indian politics. Before I hand over to the chair, I would like to request all the participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. All the participants shall be muted during the seminar. Questions may be posted in the chat box along with your name and affiliation. Alternatively, also use the raise your hand option during the Q&A session. You shall then be called upon to unmute yourself and ask your question. I now hand over to the chair. Once again, our sincere thanks to Dr. Sahu, and over to you now, sir, for taking the proceedings forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Suradeep. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to today's Wednesday seminar at the Institute of Chinese Studies. Today's lecture addresses a question that lies at the heart of contemporary Asian geopolitics. That's why have India and Japan, come so close strategically in spite of all of their bonding, the strategic ties, yet they stopped short of becoming formal allies. At first glance, the answer may seem very obvious. Both countries are major democracies. They have shared values, shared interest, shared history. There is complementarities, which it's very popular in Japanese, which is called hokansei. The relationship is very complementary. Both have maritime powers with deep interest in Indo-Pacific. Both have become increasingly concerned about China's growing military capabilities in their border, like for India in its border, for Japan in South China Sea and East China Sea. The economic coercion, the attempt to reset the regional order for Southeast Asia, for Japan, for India in South Asia, and also in the Indo-Pacific. They cooperate in areas ranging from defense, military security, infrastructure, supply chain, critical technologies, critical minerals, regional connectivities. Yet, despite this remarkable expansion of cooperation over the last 2 decades, India and Japan have not entered into a formal alliance. This raises an important analytical puzzle. If structural pressures are pushing countries together, why do they not all respond in the same way? Why have Japan and India responded in a different way? Why do some partnerships evolve into alliances while others remain strategically close but institutionally very flexible? Why? So these are precisely the questions that Dr. Anudip Guzetti will cover in his lecture today. I also find the topic particularly timely. We frequently nowadays hear terms such as strategic partnership, alignment, strategic autonomy, unilateralism, multilateralism. The India and Japan relationship demonstrates how 21st century partnership are becoming more flexible and pragmatic than the alliance structure associated in the Cold War era. Understanding this evolution also helps us better appreciate the changing nature of power and order in the Indo-Pacific. So we are really happy that today we have with us Dr. Anudip Guzetti, who is an assistant professor of Symbiosis Law School, Pune. He completed in his PhD in political science from University of Hyderabad. Again, I did my master's from University of Hyderabad. So I'm happy to have Dr. Anudip Guzetti today. He has published widely, and his research interest includes in Indian and Japanese foreign policy, Indo-Pacific, IR theory, world order, and digital diplomacy. We are all looking forward to hearing Dr. Anudip Guzetti and look for these answers that the topic poses the questions. And please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Dr. Anudip Guzetti, and we look forward to your lecture. Dr. Guzetti, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, sir. It's indeed an honor that I'm talking in a webinar that you are chairing it. I was talked. We actually had a talk about you while I was doing my PhD there, because I was also we were looking for students who were doing IR, especially from University of Hyderabad. That's when we thought about you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for the warm welcome and also for introducing the topic for today's lecture. And I also thank ICS for giving me this opportunity. As students, we have been reading so many reports as well as opinion pieces that come out of you, as well as from. In fact, I was part of 16th AICCS conference that was held in University of Hyderabad. I was representing CSD back then, and it is like homecoming once again. Thank you so much for extending the invitation for this talk. And without any further ado, I would like to start my presentation. I have prepared few slides. I know I'm sitting in front of an expert, so no amount of research would help me address the puzzle that sir has raised, but still I would do my bit or try to do my bit. So, sir, with your permission, I'll be sharing my screen. That's okay. Please do let me know at any given point of time if I'm not audible, because I will not be seeing the screen. Instead, I will be seeing the. So, is the PPT visible, sir? Is this visible, sir?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. So thank you once again. And today's topic that I want to deal with is strategic pressures, domestic constraints, and the making of India-Japan strategic partnership. So I want to begin this talk with a relatively straightforward observation. India and Japan today cooperate in areas that would have appeared improbable even three decades ago. So their relationship now encompasses, like sir was mentioning, defense consultations, naval exercises, maritime domain awareness, logistics, cooperation, high-speed rail. Even in the current geopolitical scenario, on critical minerals, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, clean energy, and even supply chain resilience. So Japan has become one of India's most consequential economic and technological partners. At the same time, India has become increasingly important for Japan's conception of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Now, as we all know, political leaders of these both nations meet regularly. Their foreign and defense ministers participate in 2+2 dialogue. Armed forces conduct exercises across the maritime, land, and air domains. At the same time, governments now describe economic security, digital infrastructure, and also climate technologies as integral parts of the strategic relationship. Yet, as we get introduced, India and Japan are not allies. So, there is no bilateral mutual defense treaty, or there is no automatic obligation requiring Japan to defend India or vice versa. There is no permanent combined command structure, or there is no arrangement which is comparable to the Japan or United States security treaty. So the relationship still has become strategically dense or loaded, as we call it, but it has not acquired the, if I can say, institutional form of an alliance structure. Why? So systemic pressures have brought the two countries closer, but domestic institutions, strategic cultures, and economic priorities determine how far that cooperation can proceed. So with that, I want to come to the puzzle that Sir was raising: strategic convergence without alliance. So the convergence between India and Japan is not rhetorical in any way. It is visible across multiple areas. And for this particular talk, I have identified 5 substantive areas. The first is the defense and maritime security. As we all know, India and Japan conduct the JIMEX bilateral maritime exercise, participate together in the Malabar exercise, and have also expanded Army and Air Force exchanges through various initiatives like Shinyu Maitri or Veer Guardian. They have also established 2+2 dialogue between their foreign and defense ministers, and also, in fact, concluded an agreement for the reciprocal provision of supplies and services. And in fact, more recently, discussions have advanced regarding the transfer of Japan's Unicorn, or what is also called as Japan's Unified Complex Radio Antenna, right? But also the second important domain is the economic security. Now, India and Japan are cooperating on semiconductors, as I was mentioning earlier, telecommunications, critical minerals, pharmaceuticals, and they are also trusted digital infrastructure. There, so these are no longer treated simply as commercial sectors. They are now regarded as areas in which dependence on a single foreign supplier can produce strategic vulnerability. The keyword strategic vulnerability. The third is the infrastructure. Now, if you look at the history of India and Japan relations, Japanese development assistance and technology have contributed to various systems in India, including metro systems, freight corridors, uh, industrial corridors, and also the high-speed rail project. Infrastructure cooperation, in that sense, has created a long-term Japanese institutional and economic presence in India. And the fourth is the evolving AI technology, or digital technology and artificial intelligence. So the bilateral agenda now includes digital partnership 2.0 and AI cooperation initiative. And the fifth one is energy resilience. Now this is where we are heading to. The two countries are discussing petroleum reserves as well, hydrogen, ammonia, even compressed biogas, and other technologies needed for energy transition and uh, supply security. But let's come back to our main thing, that this growing density or this loaded partnership exists alongside clear limitations. Like I was mentioning, there is no mutual defense clause and no automatic obligation to use force. Their strategic geographies are different completely. Japan's immediate concerns are concentrated especially in the East China Sea, the Korean Peninsula, Taiwan, as well as the Western Pacific. India also simultaneously considers line of actual control, Pakistan, Indian Ocean, and the wider continental and maritime neighborhood. So, in fact, their alliance postures are also fundamentally different. So, Japan is an American treaty ally, as we all know. India has consistently rejected any kind of treaty alignment and retains a very strong presence for strategic autonomy. So their domestic political constraints also differ. If we can look at it, Japanese policy is mostly shaped by constitutional pacifism, also anti-nuclear norms. In fact, and the politics of United States alliance. Whereas Indian policy is mostly shaped by strategic autonomy, developmental requirements, and state capacity. Now, both countries also remain economically connected to China, but their objective is generally to reduce critical vulnerabilities rather than pursue a complete, if I can call, economic separation. So, coming to our main theme, or the theoretical framework that I use to understand India and Japan bilateral relations is neoclassical realist model. So looking back at the relationship, external or systemic pressures explain why India and Japan cooperate, while domestic variables explain the scope, the space, the instruments, and also the limitations of that cooperation. I just want to go to the realist part once. As we all know, structural realism directs our attention towards the distribution of power in the international system. From this perspective, India-Japan cooperation is a logical response to changes in Asia. And what were these changes? The expansion of Chinese power, maritime competition, uncertainty regarding American commitments, or economic coercion also. But structural factors alone cannot explain the actual foreign policy outcome. For example, if China's rise mechanically produced alignment, India and Japan should have moved steadily and consistently towards an alliance. Instead, their relationship has developed unevenly. We all know that it was interrupted by Japan's response to the India's nuclear test in 1998. It accelerated after 2000. It periodically lost momentum also during leadership instability in Japan and also moments of strategic caution in India. So the international environment did not change at precisely the same rate as the bilateral relationship. So something intervened between the systemic factors and the foreign policy behavior. Now, so neoclassical realism provides that intervening level of analysis. It accepts that the international system creates incentives, at the same time it creates constraints, but also argues that these pressures, external pressures, pass through systemic transmission belt or what we call as domestic variables. For example, political leaders must perceive and interpret the external environment. Governments must mobilize resources. In the same way, bureaucracies must convert political intent into policy. In the same way, or if we are active on LinkedIn, we would know that business groups must consider commercial incentives, and business groups have actually the forefront also taking forward the economic relationships. In the same way, public opinion must accept the political and material costs of relationships. So, in that sense, India's foreign policy is shaped by its post-colonial identity, strategic autonomy, and economic transition. In the same way, Japan's foreign policy is influenced by its American alliance, its pacifist constitution, its dependence on external markets, and historically very cautious security posture. So I identified, the first stage, there are systemic pressure, and then which passes through domestic variables, and then comes the policy outcomes. So the same international pressure can produce different policy pathways, like sir was mentioning, in both the capital region, in both the capitals. So China may be a shared concern, but China is perceived through different strategic geographies of India and Japan. So neoclassical realism allows us to explain not only why cooperation happens, but also why it takes the form that it does. Now, I don't. This is something I don't want to go in detail, but just to give you an idea that there is so much after 1952, 1991. There is so much goodwill between India and Japan, but that goodwill could not overcome the international structure or international structure of Cold War. So Japan was incorporated into the American hub and spokes alliance system. India adopted non-alignment, but developed a close defense and political relationship with the Soviet Union. At the same time, Japan's export-oriented capitalist economy and India's protected state-led economy offered very limited complementarity in the 1990s. So the relationship during the Cold War therefore be characterized as a limited friendship without much strategic purpose. But the end of the Cold War changed the structural environment completely. India liberalized its economy and introduced its Lucist policy. Japan began to view India outside the Cold War prism, but the 1990s did not immediately produce a strategic partnership because both countries were experiencing domestic and economic, also political instability. So normalization. Oh, sorry. Before going that, the most significant interruption actually came after India's nuclear test. That is in May 1998. Japan suspended yen loans also and grant assistance and became one of the strongest critics of India's nuclear policy. Now, this response cannot be explained only through the international balance of power structures. It was deeply connected to Japan's anti-nuclear identity, the historical memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, domestic public opinion, and also if we can remember Hashimoto's government's own political vulnerability at that point of time. So normalization began around 1999 and 2000. Prime Minister Yoshiro Mori's visit to India in 2000 produced the global partnership. Annual summits were subsequently institutionalized. The relationship was elevated to a strategic and global partnership in 2026. So all this happened. So how do we understand it? Systemic pressures. The next question is why India-Japan cooperation became strategically very rational. So the first systemic factor is a redistribution of power in Asia. Now, China's economic growth, naval expansion, missile capabilities altered the regional balance. China became a major security concern for Japan in the East China Sea and also around Taiwan. However, relationship should not be reduced to China alone. Nevertheless, China constitutes an important structural factor because it affects the security calculations of both the states simultaneously. And the second important factor is regional military expansion. According to CIPRI data, world military expenditure reached approximately 2.87 trillion dollars in 2025, while military expenditure in Asia and Oceania reached approximately $681 billion. So if you look at this expenditure patterns, China's military expenditure was estimated at around $336 billion, while Japan's reached $62 billion. Now, these figures reflect a regional environment in which states increasingly believe that military capability and strategic preparedness have become necessary. The third systemic factor was maritime vulnerability. And the fourth is uncertainty about regional role of the United States, as our chair was mentioning in the beginning. So Japan's defense is formally anchored in the alliance with the United States, but Japan has increasingly recognized that the alliance must be supplemented by wider partnerships with nations such as India. Now, we should not confuse about America's role, because India, of course, values a strong American presence in Asia, but does not wish to become dependent upon an alliance led by Washington. And the fifth is the geostrategic fragmentation. Uh, this is where the pandemic, semiconductor shortages, trade restrictions, and weaponization of supply chains became an important factor. And the last one is economic coercion. So these pressures took or made cooperation rational, but they do not prescribe the exact institutional response. They create incentives to cooperate, yes, but states retain considerable discretion over whether they respond through an alliance, a strategic partnership, or a minilateral institution, or defense exercises, or even economic security arrangements. So the structure points India and Japan towards each other, but domestic politics decide how closely they travel together. So now I want to shift towards domestic factors that shape the partnership. I've listed down some of them here. I will not talk in detail, but I will try to mention them. So India's first and most important domestic variable is strategic autonomy. Yes, strategic autonomy is sometimes presented as a continuation of non-alignment, but it is better understood as a durable preference for preserving independent decision making. For example, let us take what uh, became very controversial also. This was especially evident for us when former Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba proposed the idea of an Asian NATO. If we can recollect, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar rejected the idea, explaining that India had never been a treaty ally and approached Asian security through a different strategic architecture. So, India can therefore participate in the Quad, expand military exercises with Japan and the United States, the same time maintain a defense partner relationship with Russia, also participate in BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well. Now, these policies may appear contradictory if foreign policy is viewed through alliance framework, but they become more comprehensible once we start viewing through strategic autonomy concept. The second domestic variable is leadership perception. P.V. Narasimha Rao interpreted East Asia as crucial to India's economic reform. Uh, in the same way, Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee recognized Japan's importance within India's changing relationship with Asia and the United States. Same goes with Manmohan Singh as well. He institutionalized annual summits, CEPA, and civil nuclear negotiations also. And in the same vein, Narendra Modi government integrated Japan into Act East, Make in India policies, infrastructure modernization, and also most importantly, Indo-Pacific. And the third variable that I looked at was India's development strategy. India seeks Japanese capital and technology for transport, manufacturing also, energy transition, and various other defense production capacities also. So therefore, it was shaped by developmental requirements as much as by military calculations. And the fourth is state capacity. We always neglect the factor of state capacity when it comes to bilateral relationship between India and Japan, and most importantly, with any other nations also. So India can announce ambitious programs at the highest political level, but as we all know, implementation requires coordination among the union government, state governments, local administrations, courts, and other private contractors. One of the prime example was when Andhra Pradesh, the state government of Andhra Pradesh, received a letter from the Japanese ambassador back in 2019 regarding purchasing power agreements. So what exactly? That was a completely political game. So in the same way, regarding to Mumbai Ahmedabad high speed rail also. The fifth is economic pragmatism, and the sixth one that I identified was technological requirement, and the seventh is relatively the people to people foundation. In fact, one of the pointers that I discussed a lot in my piece was how economic groups or industrial bodies are playing a role within this particular thing, but I didn't bring that up here. Now let's move to Japan's domestic factors. So just within 10 minutes, I will probably finish it. So Japan's domestic variables begins with the reliance on United States. Now, Japan's security policy is organized around an American treaty commitment, which extended nuclear deterrence and presence of American military force. Now, this produces an important asymmetry. Japan approached India from inside an alliance structure, whereas India approached Japan from outside any kind of alliance structure. Japan may favor greater coordination among American allies and partners. India remains cautious about those arrangements that could produce alliance linkage obligations back then. The second is Japan's pacifist strategic identity, that is Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which renounces war and has historically constrained the use of military power, which slowly started changing. And the creation of Japan's National Security Council, the 2015 security legislation and subsequent defense reforms have expanded the role of self-defense forces also. And the third is anti-nuclearism, which we discussed how it affected India's relations in the 1998. And the fourth is leadership. In fact, our chair knows he also wrote a piece on Shinzo Abe, if I'm not wrong, if I can recollect. So Shinzo Abe's role was also especially important. Abe had a coherent vision of Japan as a more active strategic power. He promoted the Indo-Pacific, established new national security institutions. He revised defense export principles and also supported limited collective self-defense. Yet, the continuation of the partnership after Abe demonstrates that it has become institutionalized. The fifth is Japan's bureaucratic capacity. Now, the bilateral relationship is implemented by a dense network of institutions, such as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, Ministry of Defense, JICA, JBIC, JETRO, NEDO, all others. Even the aid that some of the NGOs receive in India passes through JICA also. So these institutions allow Japan to combine diplomacy, they combine finance, technology, infrastructure, and also industrial policy. For example, in the clean energy field, Japanese cooperation has involved JETRO, JBIC, JICA, like I was mentioning, NEDO also. Now, the sixth is Japan's domestic economic condition, and most importantly, the last one, public opinion. This is most important with respect to nuclear as well as political participations and also in wars. So the result is a Japanese pathway towards greater security cooperation that remains legally controlled and bureaucratically very cautious and also compatible with the American alliance. So how did this transform? How did all these domestic variables, systemic factors influence the relationship in certain domains? The first I chose was the economic partnership, and then is the security partnership. I will just touch upon them because I know I've taken some time, and then the domains of convergence, the last one. So economic relations are among the foundations of the partnership, but they also reveal its limitations. Just to give you some numbers here, in the financial year 25-26, bilateral trade reached up to approximately $27.4 billion. In that, Indian exports to Japan stood at around $6.4 billion, while Indian imports from Japan reached approximately $21.4 billion. So India therefore continued to run a substantial bilateral trade deficit. So these numbers demonstrate substantial economic engagement for sure, but bilateral trade remains relatively modest when measured against the size of two economies. The CEPA agreement did not produce the dramatic expansion in trade that many initially anticipated. So the strategic importance of the economic partnership, therefore, lies less in aggregate trade than in the composition of economic engagement. For example, Japanese investment is concentrated in manufacturing, automobiles, electrical equipment, telecommunication, pharmacies, and also Japanese ODA has supported metro systems and all other projects in India. So the economic relationship is thus moving from a predominantly ODA-based partnership towards a hybrid model, combining development finance, considering India's development agenda, private investment, especially passing through industrial bodies, technological cooperation, considering India's ambitions of technological leap, and also economic security. So political trust continues to run ahead of commercial integration of both these nations. And then comes the security partnership. Now, the security partnership has developed through a sequence of institutional arrangements rather than through a single alliance treaty, which I have mentioned in the slide, but I'm not going to talk about it. There are so many engagements, exercises. All these exercises create maritime interoperability between Indian Navy and Japanese maritime defense forces. And these exercises also create habits of communication, procedural familiarity, and professional trust. Yet, interoperability is not the same as alliance system. So the exercises do not create an automatic obligation to intervene in each other's conflicts. The reciprocal logistics agreement facilitates cooperation, but it does not commit either country to provide operational support in every contingency. Defense dialogues improves consultation, true, but they do not establish a combined command. So the partnership therefore represents alignment or partnership by habit or by need and necessity rather than alliance by treaty. And while doing so, it creates an institutional capacity to cooperate when political leaders choose to do so, while preserving the sovereign right of each governments to decide whether cooperation is appropriate in a particular crisis. And I want to move to the convergences or the areas where the partnership is strongest, considering all the how all the intervening variables are participating in each of these domains. The first is the maritime security. And as I was mentioning, it includes naval exercises, logistics, training, and all. The second is infrastructure, especially Japanese OD and technology. And third is economic security. The two governments cooperate on semiconductors now, especially after 2019-2020. The objective is to prevent excessive dependence on a single supplier or politically vulnerable production networks. The fourth is digital technology, considering India's ambitions and artificial intelligence, digital partnerships. The fifth is energy alliance. The sixth is human resource cooperation. These are the areas where the cooperation is very strong. Now they increase resilience, interoperability, and mutual dependence without requiring any sort of military commitments or without requiring any alliance. They are politically easier to sustain because each country retains discretion over implementation, especially because how public opinion changes uh, easily, especially in Japan. If you see, public opinion and surveys matter a lot while choosing leaders in these nations. So why convergence stops short of an alliance? So the first constraint is alliance posture. India and Japan shares concerns about the Indo-Pacific order, yes, but their institutional positions completely differ. Japan is embedded in the American alliance system. India rejects any treaty commitments. The second constraint is nuclear politics. Now, India and Japan eventually concluded a civil nuclear agreement, but the process was delayed by Japan's anti-nuclear identity and India's refusal to join the NPT or CTBT. The third constraint concerns defense technology. Unicorn and other discussions demonstrate progress, true, but major defense transfers remain affected by cost, export controls, and also India's domestic procurement procedures. The fourth is economic entanglement with China. Both countries seek to reduce strategic vulnerabilities, but China unfortunately remains economically important. Full decoupling would impose major costs on manufacturers, consumers, and also producers, as we have seen in the in last year as well as during Prime Minister Takeshi's comments on China. Sixth constraint is very thin social base of the relationship, unlike other Western nations. Shared domestic values and historical goodwill are politically useful, but there are other constraints like language barriers, limited migration, and relatively very modest educational exchange constraints. So these constraints are not only temporary, but will necessarily, of course, they will necessarily disappear with time, but many are deeply embedded in the political identities and institutional structures of the two states. For example, India is unlikely to abandon strategic autonomy merely because its threat perception of China increases. In the same way, Japan is unlikely to detach its India's policy completely from the United States alliance system. Same goes with anti-nuclear sentiment in Japan and India's federal and bureaucratic implementation also. So the absence of alliance should therefore not be regarded as a failure of the relationship. Instead, it may be the condition that makes deep cooperation politically sustainable. So, come to the end, the most recent phase of the relationship is characterized by merging of economics, technology, and national security. At the 2025 summit, India and Japan revised their security understanding and launched an economic security initiative. They even announced digital partnership 2.0, Japan India AI cooperation. All in the same way, the 2026 summit between both the prime ministers expanded this agenda. In fact, the 2026 defense policy dialogue focused on rapidly implementing the summit decisions. Japanese and Indian officials agreed to strengthen coordination, advance unicorn. So the contemporary phase therefore represents more than a quantitative expansion of cooperation. The meaning of security itself has changed. Economic resilience, access to technology, energy supplies, especially due to the ongoing conflicts between Iran, USA, and Israel, and also the Strait of Hormuz, and also data infrastructure, industrial capacity. So the fundamentals of economic cooperation or the fundamental areas of economic cooperation have changed according to structural incentives also. So a state can be strategically vulnerable even without suffering a military attack, right? So it can be denied semiconductors, depend on foreign digital systems, excluded from technological advancements, or subject to any kind of energy disruptions. So in that sense, India and Japan relationship can be described as calibrated strategic alignment. This particular partnership begins with shared pressures or strategic factors like China's growing capabilities, maritime risk, uncertainty about international order, as well as technological dependence. But all these factors or all these external pressures are then filtered through domestic variables such as India's strategic autonomy, Japan's pacifist identity, leadership perceptions, state capacity, as well as bureaucratic institutions. So the resulting instruments or the outcomes of this particular uh, pressures are very flexible. They include Quad 2.2, 2 plus 2 dialogues, maritime exercises, agreements, ODA, CEP, and all others. But the relationship avoids any kind of formal alliance system. So there is no defense obligation, no permanent combined command, no legal commitment in any conflicts. So I wanted to define this strategic partnership as a durable relationship that deepens cooperation in very strategically important domains while avoiding hierarchy and legal entrapment. So I used calibrated because it does not simply imply weakness or any kind of hesitation. It describes a deliberate attempt to match the instrument of cooperation to the degree of interest. So to conclude with four propositions here. First, China matters, yes, but China does not explain everything. The partnership is also driven by infrastructure, energy technology, markets, maritime geography, and economic security as well. Second, systemic pressure do not mechanically determine foreign policy. Domestic variables determine the depth, the pace, instruments, and also political limits of cooperation. Third is India and Japan are constructing partnership through flexible institutions rather than treaty obligations. Quad, 2 plus 2 dialogues, ODA, technology partnerships are all part of it. And fourth, the principal test of the relationship is no longer the production of additional declarations, it is its implementation. So the future significance of the partnership will depend upon whether all these commitments are successful, whether unicorn is transferred or not, and semiconductor initiatives create tangible research and industrial capacity, or it would go beyond its established sectoral and geographical concentration. So the India-Japan relationship is therefore best understood neither as an inevitable alliance nor as a merely transactional partnership. So it is a calibrated strategic alignment in which convergence is genuine, yes, but its institutional form remains very much, if I can say or use the word, conditioned by different strategic cultures, different domestic political constraints, and also different conceptions of national interest. So systemic pressures, as I was mentioning, created the incentive to cooperate, but it was only domestic politics and domestic variables which determines how the cooperation was organized. So that is why I would say India and Japan have produced convergences to a greater extent, but without any kind of formal alliance. I would stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anudeep, for a very insightful and well-structured presentation. Dr. Gujati explored the nuances of India-Japan relations through the lens of neoclassical realism. The presentation, compellingly demonstrated how external systemic pressures, a shifting regional power balance, shared maritime vulnerabilities, and geopolitical, geoeconomic risks have driven Tokyo and New Delhi closer together. Yet, at the same time, you also explained that these external drivers are filtered through domestic realities dictating just how far this partnership can go. That's a very, compelling argument. My own view in this has always been that while changing regional geopolitics has undoubtedly accelerated the strategic convergence or cooperation, the durability of India-Japan relationship rests on something deeper. Over the past 2 decades, the partnership has developed through sustained political trust, like the leadership of both the sides, institutional dialogue, economic cooperations. Like, we are not saying that economic cooperation has reached the peak, but the kind of cooperation that we have seen in the last 2 decades, the shared commitment to maintaining a stable Indo-Pacific order, this foundation suggests that the relationship has acquired an intrinsic value that extends far beyond responding to any strategic challenge, for that matter, China or any other strategic challenge. So at the same time, we are also witnessing a world where economic security, technological cooperations, resilient supply chains, critical minerals, rare earth, are becoming central to statecraft or diplomacy. So this raises interesting questions about how strategic partnership will evolve in the coming decades. Thank you, Anudeep, for a very, very insightful presentation. Now, moving on to the Q&A section, let me start with viewers. Please, write down your questions in the chat box by introducing yourself and be precise on the questions. May I start with Anudeep? Like, to what extent do you think India-Japan partnership has become self-sustaining? And if the external security environment were to become less adversarial, let's say we don't have any issue with China, let's say Japan also coexist very peacefully, like their economic partnership and the the World War or pre-World War era historical animosity between China and Japan is not there. The like you can see the people-to-people exchanges far outweighs India-Japan people-to-people exchange, for that matter. Let's say if those external security environment are to become very, very less adversarial, would the partnership continue to depend, or is it current momentum still largely driven by shared concern over China's rise, or over China's interference in India's border, or China's interference, misadventures in South China Sea or East China Sea? So, so considering this, what do you think? What extent India-Japan partnership has become self-sustaining without, without consideration to anything else?
But thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for first very clearly articulating my idea maybe in my talk, and also for those questions. Yes, so I would say that the partnership has become self-sustaining, but not fully autonomous from the external security environment, at least as of now. So the China and the changing Indo-Pacific balance supplied the if I can say, the strongest strategic acceleration. True, yes, but where that pressure to decline substantially, or as you are mentioning, the urgency of defense cooperation, or the Quad, the maritime coordination would probably weaken. I would take a different approach in that way. So the relationship would not disappear in any way, because it now rests on additional foundations. It has become more structural in its own ways, because internal domestic variables have been interacting. There are commonalities between both the domestic structures. Now political public opinion has been shifting with respect to India. In the same way, India's economic reforms are also in alignment with what Japanese uh, leaders are also looking for. Yes, it is evolving. It is slow, but they do- they are going to sustain over a period of time. So in a way, the relationship has become more self-sustaining. And with regarding to the external, if there is less external adversarial conditions, even in that case, I would say, considering India's uh, domestic variables, India's political leadership perceptions, or public opinion, or in fact elections for that matter, or in India's internal domestic lobby, also plays a key role while conducting any kind of foreign policy engagement with Japan. Even not Japan, but also other countries where external threats or external pressures are playing a huge role in driving any nations together. That's what I understand.
Thank you, Anudeep. I just reading through one question from Rapai Malikal about people-to-people exchanges or people-to-people relationship. For more than you also touched upon people-to-people links and how social research and skill mobility, will sustain this strategic alignment over the long term or something. For more than 2 decades, leader in both the countries, they repeatedly describe people-to-people exchange as the backbone or as one of the pillar of strong India-Japan partnership. Yet the outcome has never meant the summit declaration or the rhetoric, whatever you can say. Like, for example, the Indian diaspora in Japan, it's still 50,000, 60,000 odd people, whereas the Nepalese diaspora, Nepal with the size of population in comparison to India, their diaspora has gone 6 times more than India. That is almost about 300,000. And I still remember when I was a student at University of Tokyo, we were only 22 Indian students in University of Tokyo, whereas Chinese students were about 2,000. And there was a May festival in May, and we Indian students wanted to put up a stall. And the international office told us that you can't put up a stall because there is no Indian Students Association, whereas Philippines had an association, Bhutan had an association, Nepal had an association, Indonesia had an association, now Indian association. I'm proud that we made something called UTSA, University of Tokyo Indian Students Association, way back in 2010. But having had the association, we got the right to have a stall of Indian stall in the May festival every year. But still, the numbers are still, right now, hardly about 85 to 86 Indian students in University of Tokyo, whereas the Chinese number from those 2,000 has now reached almost about 3,600. So same goes with any other countries with Southeast Asia. So so this number, in comparison to, like, even if we call China as adversary, but their number and India as a strategic partner, our number doesn't match. So this raises an important question. And despite flourishing the strategic partnership, why has the human dimension of, like, people-to-people exchange dimension of India-Japan relationship has really been underdeveloped? So this is what also Rapai Maliakal has asked about your comments on people-to-people relationship. Maybe the prejudice of elite in both countries, like what CS mentioned. So your comment, your thought.
Right. So I would actually want to talk from my experience in this particular for this regarding this question. So I come from a place, Hyderabad, right? So as you all know, Telangana as well as Andhra Pradesh has always looked towards the west rather than east. It was, I think, that was because of the preferences, or when the American dream was sold in India, or especially for Telugu people through their communities as well. So it became a part of the general psyche also. So what we are witnessing now is gradual evolution of that idea. When I said I want to work on India and Japan, especially from University of Hyderabad, the first question was, look, there are no associations here. There is no one who studied Indian Japan relations from University of Hyderabad other than two MPhil. That's when I understood why Telangana and Andhra Pradesh are not sending enough people to Japan, or why is there less government to government exchanges, at least from the state governments also. That's when we put this in front of the Telangana government, saying the increasing opportunities as well as the increased language training centers within Hyderabad. They came up with a policy of sending some trained nurses from few places, not from Hyderabad but interiors of Telangana. So I would say the incentives are not sufficiently visible for most of Indian students, as well as to these state governments also. Indian students and skilled professionals have clear information networks, diaspora support, and also recruitment pathways from the United States, Britain, Canada, and also all these countries, increasingly increasingly even Germany. but Japan lacks an equally recognizable Indian alumni ecosystem also. So it is government, yes. At the same time, it is also the people and their, like I was mentioning, the alumni ecosystem. So, and also and we should also not forget Japan's labor and immigration institutions, which have traditionally also been very cautious. For example, Nepal is, yes, true, and other Southeast Asian nation communities have expanded through various other means also. For example, through language schools, vocational education, restaurant care work also. In fact, if I remember, technical training, the nurse training that I was talking about was actually happening in some of these countries way back. So Indian immigration has remained disproportionately very concentrated among highly skilled IT professionals, if I can, so, or if I can draw experience from down south also. So engineers, researchers, and corporate trainees. So it is therefore very highly skilled, but that also was a bane for us because it is numerically very narrow also. So that was also one of the reasons, is what I feel, or at least when I started interviewing people in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, also Tamil Nadu.
Yes, obviously there are many other aspects to it as well, both in terms of immigration as well as the kind of opportunity for studying, and the language barrier, the structural barrier. Where do the Japanese institution or Japanese universities go for outreach, information? So there are many things. Moving on, like you touched upon about the trade, and you touched upon the comprehensive economic partnership agreement a little during your presentation as well. As since it was signed in 2011, the Indian side always feels that there was a report from Niti Aayog which said that we are always a loser in terms of any economic partnership agreement or any free trade agreement that we sign, and that has also been true in respect of Japan as well. The trade deficit has also only widened. Like the volume of trade has increased, but the trade deficit has widened. So it has benefited the Japanese side more than that it has benefited to the Indian side. You are very much right about the staff nurse thing. Even the non-tariff barriers, like sanitary and phytosanitary barriers to trades, the language barrier to have staff nurse, particularly from Kerala, and then many other like for the products, fishery products. All of these have been, gives me a feeling sometimes, it's like we have to defeat ourselves only. India Japan trade has to overcome the yardstick that they have kept for themselves. India Japan people to people exchange, they have to, it's like almost like we are running on the track alone, but still we are coming second, because we have a lot more to achieve in those areas. Birendra Sahai from ICS wrote about role of Buddhism in India-Japan relationship. You mentioned about role of Buddhism and Buddhism and the milestone that you have mentioned about India-Japan relationship. Do you have anything to add here? Role of Buddhism in India-Japan relationship.
Right. So I didn't want to more concentrate on Buddhism as a role, because true that yes, it has played a large role. Initial contacts, uh, it has. In fact, when I wrote about it, there are three distinct roles in India and Japan relations. It was clearly civilizational familiarity, especially with respect to Buddhism, or the great Buddha, as we all wrote the Todaiji Nara in 752 long back. It remains an important symbolic milestone. So yes, Buddhism transmitted Indian philosophical, linguistic, as well as artistic influences to Japan, and largely through, that was not directly, but through China and through Korean Peninsula also. Second, Buddhism later became the part of intellectual vocabulary for Asian solidarity also. right? Thinkers such as uh, uh, Okakura Tenshin and also Rabindranath Tagore. So they drew upon the broader idea of Asian civilization. However, we should not, I would say, romanticize this history too much, because Pan-Asianism was politically contested, especially particularly after the Japanese imperial expansion in China. So Buddhism, yes, provided cultural affinity, but it could not overcome the geopolitical conflict also. And third was the contemporary uh, diplomacy with respect to Buddhism, or how Buddhism operates primarily as a form of soft power, and also, if I can say, political symbolism. So visits to Buddhist sites, restoration projects also on, and most importantly, academic exchanges uh, were older and deeper than its recent strategic convergence. So even if I can say, Buddhism has, or the cultural connect has limits as an explanatory variable also. Sir, you are mute, I guess.
Thank you, Anudeep. Do you have any more questions from anyone? Okay, let me ask another questions on defense co-development that you mentioned about. Given India's focus on Make in India and local manufacturing, how can Tokyo and New Delhi bridge state capacity gaps to translate high-level security dialogues? Like we are having security dialogues for long. How can they translate high-level security dialogues into tangible defense technology cooperations? Taking into consideration India's focus on Make in India and local manufacturing.
Right. So I think that is one of the major constraints with respect to defense cooperation, especially co-production between India and Japan also. So the principal problem, I would say, is not the absence of dialogue, like you correctly mentioned, sir. It is the absence of reliable mechanism connecting political dialogue to the industrial production process also. So both these nations should therefore, from broader defense cooperation to a small number of jointly selected, I think they should concentrate more on commercially viable projects at this point of time, considering the restrictions that Japan itself has on its own polity of not transferring high-end military equipment. The latest guidelines have changed it a bit. For example, Unicorn is an important, or it is precisely important because it can become a, I would say, a demonstrator project if it becomes viable. So both sides should complete the transfer, establish maintenance and life cycle support systems. It should be arranged in India. They should train Indian personnel. So it is not only a single system, it comes with a set of systems, including training personnel. So they need, I would, at the same time, I think they need permanent project teams below the 2+2 level that we are witnessing. And third, like you mentioned, India should be structured as a progressive localization mechanism, or it needs to have a very localized mechanism, not an immediate demand for technology transfers. Japanese firms, I believe, should remain concerned, yes, about intellectual property protection, quality assurance, and also uh, third party transfers in India. But however, India cannot accept simple imports as defense industrial cooperation. So a phased model could begin with assembly, with maintenance, and move towards component manufacturing also. With respect to Japan, which we are witnessing with some of the other Western nations. So we can start with a phased model is what I feel, to bring in more tangible benefits in defense cooperation.
Commercially viable project. Do you think BrahMos would be a commercially viable collaboration?
Definitely, sir. I would think that would be, if it's economically viable with Philippines and other nations, it would definitely be viable with Japan as well.
Okay, on that note, thank you, Dr. Anudip Guzetti. I don't see any other questions. So thank you once again, Dr. Guzetti, for an engaging and intellectually stimulating conversation. And what I like the most is about it's not only depend the understanding of India-Japan strategic partnership, but also reminded all of us audience about the value of combining theoretical rigor with empirical analysis in international relations. So I'm sure this will help all of us to reflect upon and will encourage further research and debate on this important subject and keep the theoretical rigor in mind. With that, thank you once again, and I hand over to members from ICS. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. With this, we come to an end to today's seminar. We thank Dr. Anudip Guzetti and Dr. Devendra Sahu for gracing today's seminar with their presence and for giving us their precious time. We also thank the audience for joining us today. The video of today's seminar shall be available on the ICS's YouTube channel. Details about the events can be found on the ICS website, or you can also subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. Thank you everyone for joining us today.